The text message glowed on my screen while I was still trying to register the feeling of blood matting my hair. Can't ditch lunch with Chloe now, her ex is back at it. Can you get a ride share? So sorry, hun. I stared at my husband's words through the fractured glass of my phone, my dislocated shoulder screaming with every ragged breath, and managed to type back with my one functioning hand, okay. That single word was the death certificate for our 9-year marriage, though Liam had no idea yet. He was far too absorbed in consoling Chloe Vance over her latest self-inflicted drama to notice that his wife was lying in the Oakwood Medical Center emergency room, caught somewhere between a wave of pure rage and the sweet pull of morphine. The nurses had already asked me 3 times if there was someone else they could call. Anyone at all? But I just kept staring at that text, rereading it as if the letters might magically rearrange themselves into something that made a lick of sense. My husband of 9 years had just told me to call a rideshare to get home from the emergency room after a car crash that could easily have killed me. All because Chloe Vance, his college buddy with the family money and a never-ending string of romantic catastrophes, apparently needed him more. This morning already felt like it belonged to another lifetime. I'd been in our kitchen at 6:30 a.m., preparing Liam's breakfast exactly the way he demanded it. 2 eggs, over easy, 3 slices of bacon, cooked to the point of shattering, sourdough toast with only a hint of butter. 9 years of the same breakfast meant I could do it on autopilot. My hands performed the familiar ritual while my mind was on the hospital gala that night, where I was set to receive the Therapist of the Year award. Liam had promised he would be there, or more accurately, he'd said he would try. Chloe's having another emergency, he'd mumbled over breakfast, his gaze glued to his phone screen. The faint smile on his lips was the same one he used to give me when I entered a room. Now it was reserved for her text messages. Another one? I kept my tone even, though I cracked the eggs against the side of the bowl with a little more force than was strictly necessary. That's the 3rd emergency this month. Her ex is harassing her. She's terrified Ava. The ex-boyfriend in question, a guy named Marcus, had allegedly been harassing Chloe for 6 months. It was funny how this harassment only ever seemed to flare up on Wednesday afternoons, which just so happened to be when Liam had his longest lunch break. And it was strange how it never seemed to escalate to the point of actually, involving the police. I wanted to point out these little inconsistencies, but I'd learned a while ago that defending Chloe was Liam's new favorite pastime. Instead, I just reminded him about the gala. His response was as predictable as the sunrise. I'll really try to be there, but if Chloe needs me, she would need him. She always did on Wednesdays. The thing about the Wednesday lunches was that they'd begun so innocently, I couldn't even work up the proper anger at first. About 6 months ago, Liam had brought Chloe into my physical therapy clinic at Oakwood Medical. She was dealing with crippling anxiety, and Liam wanted to make sure she got the best care. I watched from my office as she put her hand on his arm, laughing at some stupid joke he made. The gesture was casual, but it was also deeply intimate and familiar. Liam had straightened his tie when she told him it was a nice color, a peacock showing off his feathers. Chloe's going through a messy divorce, he'd explained to me that night. She doesn't really have anyone else in the city to turn to. A single lunch turned into 2. Monthly lunches became weekly. An hour stretched into 3. And it was always on Wednesdays, the day I worked my late shift and wouldn't be home until after 9. I'd tried to talk to him about it last month. We were in bed, and I could smell her perfume on his shirt. It was something expensive and floral that made our bedroom smell like a high-end boutique. "Do you think Chloe might be taking advantage of your kindness a little bit?" I'd asked, choosing my words with the care of a bomb disposal expert. Liam had rolled over to face me, his expression one of such genuine shock that for a second, I actually questioned myself. Was I the one who was wrong? Taking advantage? Ava, she's a complete wreck. Her ex is emotionally tormenting her. She has panic attacks. She needs a friend. She has parents who live 20 minutes away. She has a therapist. She has other friends. But she trusts me. Liam had said, as if that one word explained everything, as if her trust was now more valuable than our marriage vows. Catherine Pierce, Liam's mother, had pulled me aside at our wedding reception 9 years ago. She'd had a bit too much champagne, and her words had the sharp, honest edge that only expensive alcohol can provide. "You're good for him," she'd said, not as a compliment, but as a clinical assessment. "Liam needs someone practical, someone to keep him from drifting. You'll be his anchor." At the time, I'd thought she was welcoming me into her family. Now I realized she'd been hiring me for a job, Liam's keeper, the practical one who worked 12-hour shifts as a physical therapist while he played at his father's marketing agency, taking 3-hour lunches with 0 repercussions. The morning of the accident, I'd watched Liam get dressed for work, my brain memorizing the details without my permission. He was wearing the deep blue tie Chloe had complimented last week, the same tie I'd bought him for Christmas 2 years ago, which had sat untouched in his closet until she'd remarked on how it brought out his eyes. His cologne was a little stronger than usual. He'd trimmed his beard with a precision I hadn't seen in months. "Big client meeting today?" I'd asked. "Just Wednesday," he'd replied, and we both understood the code. I'd left for my shift at the hospital, wondering when we'd stopped being a team. When had I become just another piece of furniture in my own marriage? When had his phone become more engaging than a conversation with his wife? The questions haunted me through my morning appointments, through the lunch I scarfed down alone in the break room, and through the afternoon that would end with my sedan crumpled against a traffic barrier and my shoulder ripped from its socket. The irony was not lost on me that I'd spent part of my morning creating a physical therapy plan for one of Chloe's anxious colleagues, a referral she'd made, which gave her a perfect excuse to text my husband at all hours with questions about exercises and progress updates. Now, lying in an ER bed with a symphony of beeping monitors around me, I thought about all the Wednesday nights I'd come home to find Liam already in bed, feigning sleep. The credit card statements from the Meridian Club that were always a little too steep for a platonic lunch. The way he'd started placing his phone face down on the dinner table. Officer Diaz appeared at my bedside again, her face a mask of careful professionalism. "Mrs. Pierce, we've tried calling your husband 3 more times. The calls are going straight to voicemail now. He had turned off his phone. Rather than risk an interruption during his lunch with Chloe." The weight of that realization settled on me like a concrete slab. Liam had made an active choice to be unreachable while his wife was in an emergency room. "Officer Diaz," I said, my voice surprisingly firm, especially considering the morphine was making everything feel like it was happening underwater. "I know exactly where my husband is. He's at the Meridian Club on Mason Avenue. He'll be at his usual table by the window with Chloe Vance." I paused, tasting a bit of blood where I'd bitten the inside of my cheek. "Would you mind delivering the news in person? I'm worried he doesn't fully grasp the seriousness of the situation." Officer Diaz looked at my face for a long moment, and I saw a flicker of understanding, woman to woman in her eyes. "Of course, Mrs. Pierce. We can certainly do that. The Meridian Club, you said." "Every Wednesday," I confirmed, like clockwork. The clinic clock showed 6:47 p.m. when Susan, my supervisor, stopped me at the door as I was shrugging on my coat. Her face had that familiar mix of desperation and authority that signaled she was about to ask me for a favor I really didn't want to grant. "Ava, I hate to do this to you, but the quarterly billing reports are a mess. We have an audit on Monday, and I desperately need someone who actually knows our system to help me sort this out tonight." My hand hovered over the door handle. A messy report meant at least 2 hours of cross-referencing patient files, insurance codes, and appointment logs. The hospital gala started at 7:30, and my award was scheduled to be presented at 8. Liam had already made it clear that Chloe's emergency was his top priority, but a tiny, hopeful part of me thought that maybe, just maybe, if I showed up late with the actual award in my hand, he would look up from his phone and remember the woman he'd married. "I'm so sorry, Susan. Tonight's the hospital gala. Remember? The Therapist of the Year award." Susan's expression softened into understanding and then morphed into something else. Pity, maybe. She knew about Liam's Wednesday lunches. Everyone at the hospital knew. Gossip moved through a medical center faster than the flu. Of course. Go get your award, honey. You've more than earned it. The rain had started sometime during my last appointment, a soft drumming against the hospital windows that had become a full-blown deluge by the time I got to my car. The windshield wipers protested with a high-pitched squeal, the rubber worn beyond its useful life, but never quite bad enough to warrant replacing. It was another one of those little things on a long list of tasks Liam had promised we'd handle together, but never did. I pulled out of the parking garage and onto streets that were already starting to flood at the curbs. The gala was downtown at the Fairmont Hotel, a 15-minute drive in clear weather, but probably closer to 30 in this mess. My phone sat in the cup holder, and I kept glancing at it, willing it to light up with a text from Liam saying he was on his way, that Chloe's crisis was miraculously resolved, that he hadn't forgotten his wife was being honored tonight. Silence. The rain pounded harder as I turned onto Madison Avenue. The streetlights cast blurry halos on the water streaming down my windshield, forcing me to lean forward just to see the road. The radio was playing something old and sad, a song my dad used to hum while he worked in the garage. I considered calling Liam one last time, but what would be the point? He'd made his choice clear over breakfast. Chloe needed him. Chloe always needed him on Wednesdays. I was trying to figure out what I would say if anyone asked where Liam was tonight when I approached the intersection at 5th and Madison. The light was green. It had been green for several seconds as I coasted toward it, going a cautious 25 miles per hour in the downpour. I was already in the middle of the intersection when I saw movement in my peripheral vision. A massive SUV, one of those ridiculously oversized vehicles that suburban dads drive to feel powerful, was hurtling down 5th Street as if the rain didn't apply to it. My last conscious thought was that he wasn't even trying to stop. This guy in his enormous truck, probably on his phone, was about to blow through a solid red light at full speed. The impact felt like it folded my car in half, crushing the driver's side door into my body. The sound was unbelievable, nothing like the movies. It was a sickening, wet, crunching noise, the sound of metal completely surrendering to a greater force in the pouring rain. My body was thrown in directions it was never meant to go, and then suddenly the steering wheel was somewhere by my right ear, and the door was pressed against my left hip in a way that defied the laws of physics. Time went strange then. Everything simultaneously slowed to a crawl and sped up to a blur. I could see individual raindrops suspended on what was left of my windshield, each one a perfect, tiny jewel. My dad's voice echoed in my head with perfect clarity, a memory from 20 years ago when he'd seen me leaving the house in a stained t-shirt. Always wear clean clothes, Ava. What if you get in an accident? What will the doctors think? The sheer absurdity of the thought made me want to laugh, but my chest wouldn't expand. A warm liquid was trickling into my eyes, and when I tried to wipe it away, my left arm refused to obey. It just dangled at an angle that made my stomach churn. My wedding ring caught the flashing lights through the shattered window, a band of gold, now coated in a red that my brain knew was blood but couldn't quite accept as my own. 9 years wearing that ring. 9 years of believing it was a symbol of something more than just jewelry. Now it was just a piece of metal on a finger, attached to an arm that wouldn't work, covered in blood from a head wound I couldn't see but could definitely feel. The radio was still playing. Through the chaos of steam hissing from the destroyed engine and rain pouring in through the space where my window used to be, that sad, melancholy song just kept going as if nothing had happened. My brain, probably in deep shock, decided this was the most important piece of information to retain. The song was "To Build a Home" by the Cinematic Orchestra. I could identify it even as the rest of my world shut down. Some part of me found that darkly hilarious. Voices started to break through the bubble of shock. A young, panicked male voice, The kid from the SUV kept repeating variations of, "I didn't see her," and "the light was yellow," and "is she okay?" over and over again. Then other voices joined in, calmer, giving instructions. "Don't move her, call 911, check if she's breathing." Then finally, familiar professional voices. The paramedics arrived faster than seemed possible, though time had become a fluid concept, so maybe it had been hours. I recognized the controlled urgency in their movements, the way they communicated in clipped, efficient phrases. They were doing their initial survey: airway, breathing, circulation. The ABCs you learn on day one of any medical training. "Ma'am, can you hear me? Don't try to move. We're here to help you." The young paramedic leaning over me looked no older than 25. His partner seemed even younger. I wanted to tell them I knew the procedure, that I understood the terminology, that I was a physical therapist at Oakwood Medical. But when I opened my mouth, what came out was a jumble of words: dislocated shoulder, probable concussion, multiple lacerations to the forehead. They exchanged a look over my head, the kind of glance medical professionals share when a patient might have a head injury but is speaking too coherently to be dismissed. "Are you in the medical field?" the older one asked, while inserting an IV with practiced ease. Physical therapist, Oakwood, was supposed to be at a gala, Therapist of the Year. The words tumbled out, disconnected like beads from a broken string scattering across the pavement. They worked around me with a choreographed efficiency, a cervical collar to stabilize my spine, a careful examination of my shoulder that made me see white, despite whatever they'd just pushed through the IV, firm pressure on the head wound that was apparently more dramatic than I'd realized, based on how quickly they moved after getting a good look at it. "We're going to extract you now, ma'am. This might hurt a little." Might hurt a little was medic speak for this is going to be excruciating. They used some kind of tool that sounded like a giant mechanical beetle to cut away what was left of my car door. Every vibration sent a bolt of fire through my shoulder and ribs. I focused on their faces, on the rain dripping from their jackets, on anything other than the agony that made every breath feel like I was drowning in reverse. That's when Officer Diaz appeared at the open doors of the ambulance as they were loading me in. I knew her face, despite the fog of shock and drugs. She picked up her mother's arthritis medication from my clinic every month. She was always chatty, always asking about my work, my husband, my life. "Ava, oh my God, it's Officer Diaz. You're going to be okay. We need to contact your next of kin. Who should we call for you?" The response was automatic, programmed by 9 years of marriage. "Liam Pierce, my husband." I recited his number while a cynical part of my brain screamed that he wouldn't answer, that Chloe's manufactured crisis would take precedence over his wife's actual emergency. That Wednesday lunches were sacred, while Wednesday car accidents were merely an inconvenience. The ambulance doors slammed shut with a heavy thud, sealing me into a new reality. The ride to Oakwood Medical took 12 minutes according to the digital clock blinking above my head, though time had become elastic and untrustworthy since the moment that SUV had rearranged my evening plans along with my musculoskeletal system. The acoustic tiles of the ER ceiling swam slowly into focus as they moved me from the ambulance gurney to a hospital bed. Someone had tried to make them cheerful once, painting little clouds in some of the squares, but years of fluorescent lighting had yellowed them into something that resembled old molars, more than a bright sky. I counted them while Dr. Evans examined my shoulder, his hands surprisingly gentle for someone who looked like he'd been on his feet for 2 straight days. "This is going to be uncomfortable," he warned, which was doctor speak for brace yourself for a world of pain. "On 3. 1, 2. The sickening, grinding pop as my shoulder slid back into its socket sent a bolt of white lightning through the entire left side of my body. For a split second, I wasn't in the ER anymore. I was back in our kitchen last month, asking Liam to open a stubborn jar of pickles. "You're stronger than you let on, Ava," he'd said, with that specific tone of gentle annoyance he'd perfected over the years. You don't need me for every little thing." The bitter irony of that memory hit me harder than the pain medication they were now pushing through my IV. Here I was, with a genuinely dislocated shoulder, not letting on about anything, and Liam was nowhere in sight. I wondered if he'd even believe this was real, or if he'd assume I was just being dramatic about this too, the way he accused me of being dramatic about Chloe monopolizing his life. "There we go," Dr. Evans said, a note of satisfaction in his voice as he gently tested the joint's range of motion. "Clean reduction. You'll be sore for a while, but there's no permanent damage." Nurse Brenda appeared at my bedside as Dr. Evans moved on to his next emergency. Brenda had worked in the ER for 20 years, and you could see it in the calm, measured way she moved, as if she'd learned to carry the weight of other people's trauma without letting it break her own back. Her expression held that unique blend of sympathy and efficiency that told me she had news I wasn't going to like. "Honey, we've been trying to get a hold of your husband. The number you gave the officer." She held up the department phone, showing me the call log. 3 attempts. All of them went straight to his voicemail. 3 calls. 3 separate times the hospital had tried to tell Liam that his wife was in their emergency room. I knew exactly where he was. I could picture him perfectly, sitting at the Meridian Club, his phone turned face down on the starched white tablecloth, giving Chloe his undivided attention as she recounted whatever fictional slight had justified his presence there. But knowing it and accepting it were 2 very different things. "Let me try," I said, reaching for my purse with my good hand. My phone screen was a mosaic of cracks from the accident, but it miraculously still worked. My fingers were shaking as I typed out the message, though I couldn't tell if it was from the medication or the dawning horror that I already knew how this was going to end, had an accident. "I'm at Oakwood ER, dislocated shoulder. Concussion. Can you come get me?" The message status changed to delivered almost instantly. Then those 3 little dots appeared, and my heart did a stupid, hopeful flutter in my chest. He was typing, he'd seen it. Maybe the calls hadn't gone through. Maybe his phone had been on silent. Maybe there was still a perfectly reasonable explanation that didn't involve him choosing Chloe over his injured wife. The dots appeared and disappeared a few times, as if he were composing and deleting, searching for the right words. Each time they vanished, my hope faltered a little more. And then, finally, his reply arrived with the soft vibration that once upon a time would have made me smile when I saw his name. "Can't ditch lunch with Chloe now. Her ex is back at it. Can you get a ride share?" "So sorry, hun." I read it 3 times, convinced I was hallucinating. The concussion must be affecting my ability to read. Surely my husband of 9 years had not just suggested I get a rideshare home from the emergency room. Surely he hadn't placed Chloe's recurring Wednesday drama above his wife's verifiable medical emergency. But there it was, in the blue and gray bubbles of our text history. 24 words that somehow managed to perfectly encapsulate everything that was wrong with our marriage. The casual dismissal of my pain, the immediate prioritization of someone else's manufactured crisis, the suggestion that I should handle my own emergency transport as if I'd merely gotten a flat tire instead of being T-boned by an SUV. Something fundamental shattered inside my chest as I stared at that message. It wasn't my heart, not exactly, though that was certainly part of it. It was bigger, more structural. It was the entire framework that had held up my life for the last 9 years. The foundational belief that when things got really bad, when the chips were truly down, Liam would choose me. He would choose us. He would remember the promises he'd made in front of God and our families. Brenda was still standing there, watching my face crumble as I processed my husband's reply. She had probably seen this exact scene play out 1,000 times in 1,000 different ways. The spouse who couldn't be bothered, the partner who had more important places to be, the emergency contact who wasn't interested in the actual emergency. "Is there someone else who can come get you, sweetie?" she asked gently. I looked at my phone again, at Liam's message sitting there like a key piece of evidence in a trial I hadn't even known I was a part of. Then I looked up at Brenda, at her kind, weary face that had seen too much human disappointment to be surprised by any of it. "No," I said, and my voice sounded like it belonged to a stranger. "No one is coming, but I do need to make one more call." I scrolled through my contacts until I found Officer Diaz's number, which I'd saved months ago after a series of break-ins in our neighborhood. She answered on the second ring, her voice full of concern. "Ava, how are you doing, honey? I've been worried sick. I'm stable, thank you." "Officer Diaz, I have a strange request." My voice was rock steady, despite the tectonic plates shifting inside my chest. My husband isn't answering his phone, but I know precisely where he is. The Meridian Club on Mason Avenue. He's at his usual table by the window with a woman named Chloe Vance. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and I could almost hear her processing the implications of what I was asking. "Would it be possible for an officer to notify him in person?" I continued, each word deliberate and sharp. "I'm just so worried he doesn't understand how serious this was." Another pause, this one longer. When Officer Diaz spoke again, her tone had changed. It was filled with a deep, unspoken understanding that made me want to cry for the first time since the crash. "We can certainly do that, Ava. The Meridian Club, you said. We'll send a car right over, thank you. He'll be at the table by the window, the one with the best view of the city, with Chloe Vance. They have it every Wednesday." "Every Wednesday," Officer Diaz repeated, and those two words carried all the weight in the world. After I hung up, I leaned back against the thin hospital pillow and closed my eyes, letting myself imagine the scene that was about to unfold. The Meridian Club with its crystal stemware and hushed, elegant atmosphere. Liam leaning in, hanging on every word of Chloe's latest tale of woe. Her hand would probably be on his arm, that casual, possessive touch that meant everything and nothing, and then the front doors would swing open. Two uniformed officers would step inside, their dark uniforms a stark contrast to all that white tablecloth civility. Conversations would falter, forks would hang suspended in mid-air, and every single person in that restaurant would turn to watch as the police made a direct line for Liam's table. Chloe's perfectly manicured hand would fly to her mouth in a theatrical gasp. Liam's face would cycle through confusion, then annoyance, and then, finally, the dawning public horror of understanding. The silence in the room would be absolute as Officer Diaz explained that his wife had been in a serious car accident, that she was in the emergency room, and that they had been trying to reach him for hours. The ER had settled into its own unique rhythm around me while I waited for the fallout. The rhythmic beeping of monitors, the soft squeak of nurses' shoes on the linoleum floors, the low murmur of other people's private disasters being managed with professional calm. I had closed my eyes, not really sleeping, but drifting in that medicated limbo between consciousness and a bad dream, when my phone vibrated against the starchy hospital blanket. 3 texts came through in quick succession, Liam's name lighting up my shattered screen like a fire alarm. "Ava, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize it was that serious. Why didn't the hospital try calling more than once? Sending the police was completely unnecessary and just vindictive." I stared at the words, watching them blur and sharpen as my concussion made reading a frustrating exercise. The progression of his logic was almost a perfect case study in narcissism. First the apology, then the deflection, then the accusation. It was the Liam Pierce playbook for avoiding blame, delivered in real time while I was lying in a hospital bed with 15 stitches crisscrossing my forehead. Another vibration. "You're being dramatic about this." 4 messages. 4 separate attempts to twist this into being my fault. The accident was serious enough to warrant a half-hearted apology, but not serious enough for him to leave his lunch. The hospital should have tried harder to reach him, as if 3 calls sent directly to voicemail weren't a clear enough message. Sending the police was vindictive, not a logical response to his deliberate unavailability. And then the crown jewel of his gaslighting. I was being dramatic. My good hand was shaking as I placed the phone on the bedside table without answering. What could I even say? That a dislocated shoulder and a concussion weren't dramatic enough to warrant his attention? That his bleeding wife in an ER should have just waited patiently for Chloe's crisis to be resolved? The curtain around my bed rustled open, and my younger brother Mark walked in, looking like he'd just driven through a hurricane to get there. He was still in his work clothes, a crisp shirt and slacks that made him look like the successful contracts lawyer he was, but now they were rumpled and dotted with rain. Ava, his face, usually set in the easy, confident smile that won over judges and juries, was as grim as I'd ever seen it. 2 hours, he said, crossing to my bed in 3 long strides. For 2 hours I've been driving, my stomach in knots, thinking my sister could be... His voice caught, and his hand found mine, his grip gentle despite the fury radiating off him. Then I get here, and the nurse tells me your husband suggested you call a rideshare. Ava. Number. Just no. He pulled the visitor's chair over with his free hand, sinking into it without letting go of me. Let me see the messages. I handed him my cracked phone and watched his face transform as he read Liam's texts. The change was almost theatrical. First disbelief, then a flash of pure rage, and finally a cold, calculated look that I recognized from his courtroom battles. This was Mark in litigation mode, only instead of a hostile corporate takeover, he was calculating the swift and total dissolution of my marriage. 9 years, he muttered, still scrolling. 9 years I've watched that guy treat you like you were his assistant instead of his wife. But this is a whole new level of selfish. He took out his own phone, his thumbs flying across the screen with practice speed. I'm calling Rico, the locksmith. He owes me one. He can have the locks on your townhouse changed by tomorrow morning. Mark, I don't know if I'm ready to... And Maria's moving. They specialize in rapid extractions. Divorce situations, messy breakups, that sort of thing. They're discreet and they're fast. The sheer velocity of it all made my head spin more than the concussion already was. It's been 9 years, Mark. I can't just what? Demand a basic level of human decency from your husband? Expect him to show up when you're in the hospital? His voice softened, but his fingers never stopped moving. Ava, he chose lunch with another woman over your medical emergency. There is no coming back from that. My phone buzzed again. It wasn't Liam this time. It was an Instagram notification. Chloe Vance had sent me a message. I almost ignored it, too emotionally exhausted to deal with whatever fresh drama she wanted to unload on me. But a grim curiosity took over. The message was long, and reading it felt like watching the last remaining pillar of Liam's carefully constructed image turn to dust. Ava, I am absolutely mortified by what happened today. When the police showed up at our lunch, I was stunned that Liam hadn't left the second he got your text. I asked him why he didn't go to you right away. I had to pause and take a breath, my vision swimming. He said you were always exaggerating things to get attention, that you were probably fine and just trying to manipulate him into leaving me. Even after the officers explained how bad the accident was, he kept insisting you were just being dramatic. I have never been so disgusted by anyone in my entire life. Mark was now reading over my shoulder, his expression growing darker with every word. I had no idea you were actually hurt. The way he described it, it sounded like you got a fender bender and were blowing it out of proportion. I am so sorry for my part in this, even unknowingly. Liam is no longer a part of my life. I hope you recover quickly and find someone who actually deserves you. The message sat there on my screen like a sworn affidavit. Liam hadn't just dismissed my accident to me. He had actively painted me as a manipulative, attention-seeking hysteric to Chloe. Even when confronted by uniformed police officers confirming my significant injuries, he had clung to the fiction that I was the one being dramatic. Send me a screenshot of that, Mark said, his voice dangerously quiet. Rico can be there at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Maria's crew by noon, and I'm drafting a formal notice of separation right now. He'll say I'm overreacting, I whispered, though the words felt hollow even as I said them. Let him. While he's busy saying it, his belongings will be in boxes on the curb and the locks will be changed. Mark squeezed my hand. Ava, he showed you exactly who he is today. When you needed him the most, he chose someone else. That's not a husband, that's just a roommate you've been subsidizing. I thought about Liam at the Meridian Club, how his Wednesday routine had been more important than my life, how he'd twisted the narrative to Chloe, making me the villain to justify his own neglect, how even after the public humiliation of a police visit, his first instinct was to blame me. Call Rico, I said, my voice steady for the first time in hours. 8 a.m. tomorrow. Mark nodded, already dialing. And Maria's, moving, noon. I want everything of his packed and ready to go. My brother smiled, though it wasn't a happy smile. It was the expression of someone watching justice, long overdue, finally arrive, even if it was delivered in a hospital gown and smelling of antiseptic. I'll take care of everything, he said. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed someone would. While Liam was probably still at the Meridian Club trying to perform damage control on his ego in front of Chloe and the other patrons who'd witnessed his public shaming, Mark was already dismantling the life we had built together with surgical precision. My phone buzzed one last time. It was Liam again. We need to talk about this like adults. I glanced at the message, then at Mark, then at my wedding ring still caked with the dried blood from the accident. 9 years, reduced to this single moment, this hospital bed, this choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Liam had made it for both of us the moment he typed those 24 words suggesting I get a ride share home. Mark handed me a cup of coffee at 7:45 a.m. It was Friday, 15 minutes before Rico the locksmith was scheduled to show up. My shoulder was a constant, dull throb despite the painkillers, and moving from my bed to the couch had felt like a marathon, but I had to be here for this. You don't dismantle a 9-year marriage from under the covers. You sure you want to be front and center for this? Mark asked, already arranging a mountain of pillows to support my injured arm. I have to see it happen, I said. Otherwise, some part of me might try to convince myself it was all just a bad dream. The doorbell rang at precisely 8 a.m. Rico stood on the porch, a toolbox in hand that looked like it had witnessed 1,000 messy endings. His weathered face held the neutral expression of a man who had long ago learned not to ask why someone needed all their locks changed on a Friday morning. "You're Mark's sister?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "I'll have this place secured in an hour. New deadbolts, new handles on both doors, and I'll even swap out the lock on that side gate you probably forgot you had." He worked with a quiet, methodical rhythm, the sounds of drilling and metal scraping against metal filling the townhouse. Halfway through, he took a water break. "You know," he said, wiping sweat from his brow, "I see this a lot more than you'd think. The husband or wife forgets the other one exists until the locks get changed. Then suddenly, they remember they have a family." Maria's moving arrived at 9:30, earlier than scheduled. A team of 3 people in matching blue shirts moved through our home with an efficiency that was both impressive and heartbreaking. The crew leader, a compact woman named Maria who couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall but carried herself with the authority of a general, handed me a clipboard. "We will photograph everything before it's packed, document any pre-existing damage, and treat every item with respect, regardless of who it belongs to. Our policy is professional and neutral." They started in the bedroom. I could hear them from the couch, where Mark sat beside me, his laptop open, quietly drafting emails and making calls. The sharp rip of packing tape, the soft thud of items being placed in cardboard boxes, the occasional muffled question about what was mine and what was his. "The designer watch," Maria called out. "His," I said, "an anniversary gift from 3 years ago. I'd worked extra shifts during the flu season for 6 months to save up for that watch. Liam had worn it twice. The cycling gear, his, the bike and all the associated paraphernalia had cost more than I'd spent on car repairs in the last 2 years. He justified it as a networking tool for client rides that never seemed to happen. The signed baseball in the glass case, his, a gift from his father, supposedly valuable but mostly just a dust collector. Each item they called out felt like another piece of evidence in the case. I hadn't realized I was building against my own marriage. The expensive things I'd bought him in a futile attempt to make him happy. The high-end hobbies he'd adopted and then abandoned, leaving costly equipment to gather dust in the garage. The designer suits that required special dry cleaning and cost more than my monthly student loan payment. Mrs. Gable from next door appeared at my open front door around 10:30, holding a large foil pan of lasagna that smelled like comfort and childhood. She was 73, had lived in the neighborhood for 40 years, and possessed a quiet, all-seeing wisdom. I saw the locksmith, she said, placing the lasagna on my coffee table. About time, if you ask me. Mrs. Gable, that man never deserved a woman like you, working all those hours while he... She trailed off, suddenly finding the pattern on my rug intensely interesting. While he... What? I prompted gently. Her face crumpled with a mixture of guilt and discomfort. Oh, I don't want to be the one to stir the pot, dear. You've been through so much already. Please, I said. Whatever it is, I need to know. She sighed and settled into the armchair across from me. That woman, the one with the white convertible? She's been coming by on Tuesday afternoons sometimes. When you're at the clinic, usually stays for an hour, maybe 2. Chloe drove a white convertible. Tuesday afternoons were my other late day at the clinic when I stayed to catch up on paperwork. The information clicked into place with a sickening finality. How long? Maybe the last 3 months. I wasn't sure what I was seeing at first, and then I didn't know how to tell you, and... It's okay, Mrs. Gable. Thank you. Thank you for telling me. She reached over and patted my good hand. I brought you my divorce lasagna. My mother's recipe. I made it for myself 40 years ago when I finally kicked Mr. Gable to the curb. Best decision I ever made. After she left, I sat with this new piece of information, adding it to the mountain of evidence that confirmed my marriage had been a lie long before the accident. Chloe wasn't just having lunch with Liam. She had been coming to our home. To our bed, most likely, while I was at work, helping people recover from their injuries and working extra shifts to fund his expensive lifestyle. Ava. Maria was standing in the hallway, a questioning look on her face. The home office. There are a lot of personal papers and awards. How do you want us to handle that? I made myself stand, using Mark's hand on my good arm for support, and walked into what had once been Liam's sanctuary. His degrees were framed on the wall, alongside certifications from his father's agency and photos of him at marketing conferences and golf tournaments. It was all a carefully curated shrine to a version of success I had been bankrolling for 9 years. Pack all of it, I said. Everything that's his. What about the wedding photos? I looked at the large framed photo on his desk, both of us smiling on our wedding day, utterly clueless that I was being hired for a job, not entering a partnership, especially those. Mark's phone rang. It was his paralegal, by the sound of it. I could hear him dictating phrases in crisp, legal language that transformed my emotional train wreck into a formal document. Termination of cohabitation. 48 hours for personal property retrieval. No direct contact permitted. All communication to be conducted through designated legal representatives. By noon, the townhouse was a different place. 58 neatly packed boxes lined the entryway, each one labeled with Liam's name and a brief description of its contents. The walls were scarred with pale rectangles where his pictures used to hang. The master closet looked cavernous with only my clothes in it. The bathroom counter was suddenly spacious, with room for my things to spread out instead of being crammed into a single corner. "This just needs your signature," Mark said, holding out the formal notice. It was a thing of beauty in its cold, legal simplicity. No emotion, no blame, just the facts. Liam's belongings were packed. He had 48 hours to retrieve them. The locks were changed. Any attempt to contact me directly would be considered harassment. I signed it with my good hand. The pen felt awkward, but the motion was firm. It felt like signing the discharge papers for a patient who'd been occupying a much-needed bed for far too long, preventing someone who genuinely needed care from getting it. "I'll have this delivered by a courier this afternoon," Mark said. "He'll get it today. He'll say I'm being dramatic, that I'm overreacting. Let him say it to the boxes." Maria approached with her final checklist. 58 boxes total. Everything photographed, everything documented. We can arrange for storage if they aren't retrieved within the specified time frame. 58 boxes. 9 years of Liam's life in my home, reduced to a number on a moving company's invoice. It seemed like both too many and not nearly enough to represent almost a decade of marriage. "Thank you," I said to Maria, and I meant it. Her team had handled his possessions with more care than he had ever shown me. "Honey, this is just what we do," she said, her professional mask slipping for just a moment. "And between us, the ones who choose lunch dates over ER visits, they usually figure out what they lost about 3 months too late." The doorbell camera alert chimed at 2:47 p.m. on Saturday. Mark was in the kitchen, making us sandwiches and insisting I needed to eat something other than Mrs. Gable's divorce lasagna, when my phone buzzed with the motion detection notification. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a delivery driver or a neighbor walking their dog, but something made me open the app. Liam was standing on my doorstep, looking like a marionette whose strings had been cut. His normally perfect hair was a mess, and he was wearing yesterday's wrinkled work shirt. Behind him, his mother, Catherine, emerged from her pristine black Mercedes, wearing large sunglasses despite the cloudy sky. Her mouth was set in a line so thin it looked like a paper cut. "They're here," I said to Mark. He immediately abandoned the sandwiches and came to stand behind me, looking at the small screen over my shoulder. Liam raised a hand to ring the bell, then let it fall. He turned and looked at his mother, who was already striding toward the door with the grim determination of someone about to handle an unpleasant but necessary chore. Through the camera's tiny speaker, I could hear their hushed conversation. "Just ring the bell, Liam." "She changed the locks, you idiot. She's not going to open it. Then use the intercom. And for God's sake, stand up straight. You look pathetic." Catherine pressed the doorbell with a single, perfectly manicured finger. The chime echoed through the quiet townhouse like a gavel. I didn't move from the couch. Mark put a steadying hand on my good shoulder, a silent reminder that I was not alone in this. After a full 30 seconds, Catherine stabbed at the intercom button. Her voice, sharp and imperious, crackled through the speaker. "Ava, this is Catherine Pierce. We are here to retrieve Liam's personal effects, as outlined in your legal notice. Please confirm the items are ready for removal. There was no, 'How are you feeling after your accident?' No, 'I'm so sorry this happened.' Just cold, hard business." It was honestly the most genuine she'd been with me in 9 years. Mark reached over and pressed the respond button. "Mrs. Pierce, this is Mark, Ava's brother. The boxes are in the entryway. The door will unlock remotely. You have 30 minutes to complete the removal." There was a beat of silence before Catherine's voice returned, even colder than before. "Understood." Mark tapped the unlock icon on his phone, and I watched through the camera as Liam pushed open the door he used to own. He froze just inside the threshold, staring at the wall of cardboard boxes as if they were an ancient, untranslatable text. His mouth moved, but the camera's microphone didn't pick up what he said. Catherine brushed past him, her eyes scanning the packed items with the efficiency of a quartermaster. "Start loading the car," she instructed Liam, who still hadn't moved. "The sooner we are done with this spectacle, the better." Liam picked up the first box, labeled office supplies, and I watched his face finally register the reality of the situation. This wasn't a dramatic gesture he could talk his way out of. This was real. This was final. This was boxed, labeled, and executed with a precision that left no room for negotiation. He carried the box to the waiting Mercedes, walking like a man wading through deep water. Catherine supervised from the doorway, occasionally telling him to be more careful with a particular box, treating the entire affair like a slightly distasteful business transaction she had to oversee personally. On his third trip, Liam stopped in front of a box labeled "Wedding Photos." He just stood there for a full minute, staring at the words. His shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen, as if all the air had been let out of him. Catherine's sharp voice cut through whatever reverie he was having. "Liam, we do not have all day. Chloe has been calling you nonstop." Chloe? Of course. Even now, even in the midst of this, she was still a priority. Liam picked up the box and continued his zombie-like march to the car. I found myself studying him through the camera's lens, this man I had spent 9 years of my life with, and I realized I was looking at a complete stranger, stripped of his confidence, his curated image, and his certainty that the world would always bend to his will. He just looked hollow. He looked younger, like a little boy being forced to clean up a mess he'd made but didn't fully comprehend. "Kitchen gadgets, expensive." Liam read aloud from one box, hefting it carefully. Those were the copper pans he'd insisted they needed, though he had never once cooked a meal. The $2,000 espresso machine that made coffee that tasted exactly the same as the old one. The professional-grade mandolin slicer that was still in its original packaging. Catherine remained at her post by the door, intermittently checking her phone. She was probably already composing the narrative she would spin for her book club, a story that would explain her son's sudden single status in a way that didn't involve him abandoning his injured wife for a lunch date. Box by box, Liam cleared the entryway. His designer clothes, his barely used exercise equipment, his collection of expensive watches, his trophies from corporate golf tournaments. Each trip to the car seemed to drain him further, his steps growing heavier, his face more haggard. On what must have been his 15th trip, he paused at a small box labeled "Miscellaneous," personal, and opened it right there in the hall. I saw him pull out something small, maybe his college class ring, or the cufflinks his grandfather had left him. He just stood there, holding the object, his back to the camera, his shoulders shaking slightly. Liam. Catherine's voice was like a shard of glass. This is neither the time nor the place for sentimentality. Sentimentality. He'd called my accident dramatic. It seemed to be the family's go-to word for any emotion that was inconvenient. He closed the box and carried it out, but when he returned for the next load, his eyes were red. Whether it was from tears or simply exhaustion, I couldn't tell, and I was surprised to find that I didn't care. The entire process took 22 minutes. 9 years of accumulation dismantled in 22 minutes. Liam did one last sweep of the empty entryway, and for a brief moment he looked directly up at the doorbell camera. Our eyes met across the digital divide, and in his face I saw something I had never seen before, a flicker of comprehension. It wasn't regret, not yet, and it certainly wasn't an apology. It was just the flat, empty recognition of what he had so carelessly thrown away for a Wednesday lunch. Catherine appeared at his side. "Is that everything?" "Yeah," Liam said, his voice barely audible. "That's everything." Catherine reached for the intercom one last time. "The items have been retrieved. Liam wanted me to—" She hesitated, and for the first time, her icy composure seemed to crack. "He wanted me to tell you that he left his house key on the kitchen counter last week. Last week, before the accident. He was already pulling away, already planning his exit while I was working late shifts and making his breakfast every morning. The information should have been a gut punch, but instead it felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking satisfyingly into place. They left without another word. The Mercedes pulled away, the trunk and back seat crammed with 58 boxes of Liam's former life. I watched until the car turned the corner and vanished, taking with it 9 years of my life that I would never get back but no longer wanted. Mark helped me up, and together we walked through the newly spacious townhouse. The bathroom counter looked huge without Liam's army of hair products. The closet felt like a cavern. The living room wall showed pale, ghostly rectangles where his diplomas and awards had hung, phantoms of achievements that had never been as impressive as he pretended. I stood in the empty living room for a long moment, running my good hand along the wall where his marketing degree had been. The paint was a shade brighter there, protected from years of sunlight. It was a perfect rectangle of what used to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Jenna, a colleague from the clinic. 2 weeks had passed since the boxes had departed in Catherine's Mercedes. 2 weeks of learning to inhabit spaces that now felt vast, quiet, and entirely my own. My shoulder was healing, the stitches were out, and I had returned to work part-time, despite Mark's insistence that I needed more rest. "You are not going to believe who I saw last night," Jenna's text read. "Your ex at Murphy's Pub downtown. He was completely wasted, telling anyone who would listen that you overreacted to a minor fender bender. Said Chloe was having a severe mental health crisis and needed him more. The bartender finally cut him off after he started sobbing into his whiskey. I read the message twice, a vivid picture forming in my mind. Liam at Murphy's, a dive bar he would have sneered at 6 months ago, now drunk and desperate, trying to spin a narrative where he was the noble hero and I was the villain. The same man who'd told me to get a rideshare from the ER was now crying into a glass of cheap whiskey about being misunderstood. He actually claimed Chloe was suicidal. Jenna's next text came through, as if that was a get-out-of-jail-free card. But get this, my cousin Sarah works at Chloe's company. Chloe's been posting beach selfies from Cabo all week, some mental health crisis. So Chloe had fled to Mexico rather than deal with the fallout of Liam's sudden, messy availability. The woman whose constant crises had required his immediate and undivided attention for months had vanished the second she could actually have him. There was a certain poetic justice in that. I didn't reply to Jenna. What was there to say? That I wasn't surprised? That Liam finally getting a taste of what abandonment felt like was a dish best served cold? Instead, I went back to my work, the familiar, routine movements of physical therapy, a soothing balm. A month later, on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, Robert Pierce walked into my clinic. Liam's father looked older than I remembered. His expensive suit was slightly rumpled, and he had the kind of deep exhaustion in his eyes that comes from profound disappointment, not just a lack of sleep. "Ava," he said, approaching the reception desk with clear discomfort. "I didn't expect to... That is, I normally go to the pharmacy across town. Your blood pressure medication?" I asked, already pulling up his patient profile. My voice was professional, neutral, as if he were any other patient. Yes, the doctor increased the dosage. The stress, you know. I did know. The gossip mill at Oakwood Medical was nothing if not efficient. Liam had been fumbling at his father's agency, losing 3 major clients in 2 weeks by missing deadlines, submitting sloppy work, and showing up late and disheveled. The golden boy who'd been handed a corner office was rapidly losing his shine. "Liam's not doing well," Robert said quietly as I prepared his file for the pharmacist. "He's been calling in sick every Wednesday, says he can't handle that day of the week anymore. And Chloe, she won't take his calls. Changed her number, apparently." Every Wednesday. The day that had been their sacred ritual was now the day Liam couldn't function. He was finally learning what it felt like to be left behind by someone you thought you could count on. The only difference was that Chloe had simply stopped answering her phone, while he had actively chosen a lunch date over my emergency. That must be difficult, I said, maintaining the same detached, polite tone I used with all my patients. Robert studied my face for a moment, maybe searching for a hint of anger or triumph. He found neither. I had perfected professional neutrality over the last month. "He's been driving by the accident scene," Robert added, his voice barely a whisper. "The intersection where it all happened. His mother thinks he's trying to punish himself." I handed him the paperwork. "Will that be all today, Mr. Pierce?" He nodded, accepting the boundary I had drawn so clearly. As he left, I wondered if Liam really did drive past that intersection, if he tried to picture the SUV crushing my car door, if he finally understood, even a little, that some moments can't be undone. 2 months after the accident, on the exact 2-month anniversary, a 3-page email slipped past my spam filters. Liam had used a new email address, one created just for this purpose. The subject line was, "Please read." I finally get it. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was a masterclass in manipulation disguised as an epiphany. He claimed the stress from work had clouded his judgment. He said Chloe had told him she was suicidal, though her Instagram was still full of pictures from her healing trip to Cabo. He now had an anxiety disorder, one that had never once been mentioned in our 9 years together, that made him freeze in moments of crisis. He'd been in therapy for all of 2 weeks. He'd driven to the intersection and finally understood the trauma I'd endured. 2 months too late. "I see how wrong I was now," he wrote. "When I stood on that corner, I imagined you trapped in the car, bleeding and scared, calling for me, and I wasn't there. I was eating overpriced sea bass while you were fighting for your life. The detail about the sea bass was so bizarrely specific that it somehow made the whole thing worse. He remembered what he was eating while I was bleeding. We could try counseling," the email went on. "I've already found a therapist who specializes in relationship trauma and repair. I know I failed you, Ava, but don't 9 years of history earn me a second chance?" 9 years. He was right about the number, but wrong about what it meant. 9 years wasn't an investment that guaranteed a return. It was just time that had run out. I read the email once, then calmly created a new filter for his new address. Any email containing the name Liam or Pierce would now go directly to my trash folder. No notification, no temptation, just a digital black hole. Mark called that afternoon while I was on my lunch break, his voice thick with barely suppressed laughter. "You are not going to believe what just happened. Liam showed up at your office?" Showed up is a massive understatement. He was waiting in the parking lot at 7 a.m., looking like he'd slept in his car. He was begging me to talk to you, going on about how he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. I could picture it perfectly. Liam, who had always been so obsessed with appearances, now reduced to ambushing my brother in a parking garage like a character in a bad romantic comedy. "Let me guess, security had to escort him off the property?" I asked, only after he started shouting about true love and second chances. The entire office had their faces pressed against the windows. My secretary actually filmed part of it. He just kept yelling, "She's my wife, I love her," over and over again, as if saying it enough times could retroactively make it true. He never said it when it counted, I said quietly. "No," Mark agreed, his voice losing its humor. He was too busy eating sea bass to say it when it counted. The image of Liam being dragged out of Mark's pristine office building while professing his undying love was both pathetic and deeply satisfyingly validating. Not because I wanted him to suffer, but because for the first time in his life, he was facing real, unavoidable consequences. For 9 years, his choices had been cushioned by my willingness to absorb the impact. Now, he was learning what life felt like without that safety net. "Ava, you're glowing," Jenna said, holding up a glass of cheap sparkling wine that tasted better than any vintage champagne Liam had ever insisted on buying. "Seriously, you look 10 years younger." 6 months had passed, and more than just my living space had been transformed. My townhouse was filled with people, colleagues from the clinic, a couple of neighbors including Mrs. Gable, my book club friends, the ones Liam had dismissed as intellectually pedestrian, and of course Mark, who was happily manning the grill on the back patio. I served dinner on a collection of mismatched plates I'd gathered from 3 different thrift stores. A blue one with tiny flowers, a yellow one with a geometric pattern, a plain white one with a small chip on the edge that I thought gave it character. Liam would have been horrified. I found them charming. "Tell the story about the guy with the pet rock," someone shouted, and Brenda, my ER nurse, launched into an animated story about a patient who had come in demanding a CT scan for his sick pet Rock. The room erupted in the kind of deep, genuine laughter that had been absent from this house for years. No one was trying to impress anyone. No one was checking their watch. No one mentioned Chloe or Liam or Wednesday lunches. The next morning, I had my final follow-up appointment with Dr. Evans. He moved my shoulder through its full range of motion, nodding in satisfaction. "Perfect recovery," he announced. Then he paused, looking at the faint silvery lines on my forehead where the stitches had been. "The scars are barely there. Another few months, you won't even see them." "They don't bother me," I said, and I meant it. They were proof. They were a reminder of the moment everything had to change. Dr. Evans sat back in his chair, his expression shifting from professional to personal. I went through something similar a few years back. Not a car crash, but one of those moments where a crisis reveals what was already broken. My ex-wife served me with divorce papers in my hospital room while I was recovering from emergency appendix surgery. That's horrible. I thought so at the time. But looking back, that surgery didn't end my marriage. It just exposed the fact that it had been dead for years, and we were both just pretending it wasn't. Sometimes it takes a collision, literal or metaphorical, to show you that you've been living in the wreckage all along. His words echoed in my mind as I drove home, taking a route I had been subconsciously avoiding for 6 months. The intersection of 5th and Madison looked so ordinary in the bright afternoon sun. Just another busy corner, not the dramatic sight of personal catastrophe it had become in my memory. I stopped at the red light, the same light the kid in the SUV had ignored, and just waited. The intersection was nothing but pavement and painted lines. There was no trace of the accident, no skid marks, no shards of glass. Nothing to mark this as the place where my life had fractured into a before and an after. The world just kept moving. Cars passed, pedestrians crossed the street, lost in their phones. Life went on, completely indifferent to the history that had unfolded on this small patch of asphalt. When the light turned green, I didn't go right away. I thought about that kid in the oversized SUV, probably 19 or 20, who had changed the entire course of my life by running a red light. I'd learned from the police report that he'd been sober, just young and reckless, racing to meet his friends. His insurance had covered everything, and he had sent a formal, lawyer-vetted letter of apology, saying he had nightmares about it. I'd thought about writing back to tell him that his carelessness had, in a strange way, saved me. That his failure to stop had forced me to stop accepting a life that was less than I deserved. That sometimes total destruction is the only thing that creates space for something new to be built. But how do you thank someone for almost killing you? How do you explain that their worst moment became your liberation? The car behind me gave a gentle, polite honk, pulling me back to the present. I drove through the intersection and felt something heavy lift off my shoulders, as if I'd left it behind on that corner for good. Wednesday afternoon arrived without any fanfare. I had worked my shift, come home to my quiet townhouse, and changed into a pair of comfortable sweatpants that Liam would have called unflattering. There was no elaborate meal to cook, no anxious clock watching to make sure dinner was ready the moment he walked in the door from his extended lunch. It was just me, a cup of herbal tea, and a new novel I'd bought simply because I liked the cover. The book was a mystery, the kind Liam would have derided as commercial fluff for people who don't actually read. I was completely lost in chapter 12 when my phone buzzed. It was Mark, just checking in. "You doing okay today?" I looked around my little townhouse, at the mismatched plates drying in the dish rack, at the soft throw pillows I'd chosen for comfort instead of style, at the walls now covered in photos of people and places that made me genuinely smile. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, no longer blocked by the heavy, expensive drapes Liam had insisted on, but filtered through simple linen curtains I had sewn myself. "You know what?" I typed back. For the first time in years on a Wednesday, yes, I really am. Good. Want to grab Thai on Sunday? That new place that opened up near you. Sounds perfect. I put the phone down and went back to my book, curling my feet up under me on the couch that was now entirely mine to occupy. Outside, I could hear the faint sound of kids playing down the street, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Mrs. Gable was probably tending to her rose bushes, humming one of the old songs she loved. They were normal, everyday sounds that had always been there, but I had been too consumed with managing Liam's moods and anxieties to ever really hear them. The Wednesday afternoon stretched out before me, a quiet, empty canvas, free of obligations and dread. No more wondering when Liam would get home. No more rehearsing explanations for why dinner wasn't perfect or why I was too tired to listen to his work stories. No more checking my phone to see if Chloe's latest crisis would keep him out even later. It was just peace. A peace earned through incredible pain, but worth every single second of the journey it took to get here. I thought about Liam sometimes, but in the way you might think about a movie you saw a long time ago and can't quite remember how it ended. He existed in the past tense now, a character from a different story, a book I had closed and placed on a high shelf with no intention of ever rereading. The anger had burned itself out months ago, replaced by something that wasn't quite forgiveness, but wasn't indifference either. It was just done. A chapter that had ended the moment that SUV did more than just rearrange metal and glass. My shoulder barely ached anymore, just a slight stiffness when the weather turned. The scars on my forehead had faded into thin, pale lines that just looked like worry lines, evidence of a life lived rather than a trauma survived. Everything had healed. The bones, the skin, and finally, the parts of me I hadn't even realized were broken until they started to mend. I turned the page in my book, settled deeper into my couch, and smiled at nothing in particular. It was Wednesday afternoon. I was alone, and I was happy. Genuinely, completely, peacefully happy. The architecture of my new life was simple, but it was solid. It was built on a foundation I had laid myself and decorated with joy instead of obligation. This was what freedom felt like, not loud or triumphant, just quiet and true and entirely mine. End of story.